Hello and welcome to the lesson on Bernoulli's principle. What I'd like you to do in your workbooks for this first activity is to write a beautifully crafted sentence on one of the five questions above, just based on your knowledge at this current time. So just spend 5 minutes on this activity. I'd like you to pause the video and try to do that. Okay, so you should have created a beautifully crafted sentence now for one of these questions. And as we run through the lesson, we're going to see if we can add some more information to our answers here for these questions. So as I said, we'll be looking at lift and Bernoulli's principle, and that's part of Unit 7 Biomechanics. So the learning outcomes for today's lesson, we'll be looking at learning A and B, so that's examining forces acting on sports performers and their equipment. And we're going to understand why equipment lifts, or why activities cause lift. So factors affecting lift, we might be looking at shape of the object, angle of how it's positioned, so thinking about a discus, and then we will be looking at the principle itself and the main impacts on most performers in regards to sports. We'll also be looking at spin and how that affects performance and objects as well. So if we think about free kick, why the spin in a free kick helps that ball to lift, and why that's important. Your assignment is due on the 30th of March. It's not the 31st for this one, but it is the 30th, so just make sure that you are ready to go on that one. So the principle itself, so a little bit of background information here. Obviously, our creator here was Daniel Bernoulli. He created this principle and it is essential to most sports, okay, and that would be most ball sports, but also anything that has an object in flight. So it's the creation of an additional lift force, and therefore the time in the air of a non-round projectile in flight. So if we look at this image below, the Bernoulli principle looks at pressure differences. So if you look on the left-hand side with the arrows here, you can see that there is a high pressure with lower speed, and then in the middle there is low pressure with high speed and high pressure with low speed on the right-hand side. So essentially the principle explains how air moves from high pressure to low pressure, causing lift. Okay, so objects gain that lift during flight, and that could be affected by the angle of attack and the shape of the object itself. So just applying this to sport then, if we think about a discus here, you can see the direction of travel for the discus, and that in regards to the angle of attack, we're looking for below 45 degrees. Okay, so angle of attack, how it's attacking the air. So the air moves from high pressure to low pressure, leading to a lift force. So we've got high velocity, high speed at the top of the object, creating low pressure. And underneath the object here, we've got a slow velocity with a high pressure. Okay, so that causes the object to fly non-parabolic as well, increasing air resistance and increasing that weight. So you'll see a lift happening with the object. So that airflow, just to recap, above the discus has to travel further distance. Okay, it's got to travel all the way up and around the object, and it's traveling at a higher velocity under a lower pressure. Underneath the discus, it has to travel a shorter distance to get over it and underneath it and past the object, and so it travels at a lower velocity and travels under a high pressure, causing that lift. So there are some factors that affect the lift. So that could be the size and shape of the object, the angle of attack, and the rotation or spin of that object. Okay, so we'll look into these in further detail now. Have a think about why you think these factors affect lift. And don't forget speed. So the three factors that we will look at here are airfoil shape, angle of attack, and rotation of spin. So just starting in airfoil shape, we just know that as velocity increases, pressure decreases. So above the curved upper surface, a lower pressure zone is created. So if we think about above this object in the screen, A low pressure zone is created, and below, underneath that flat surface, so this is a wing on a plane, that creates high pressure in that zone, causing that upward force. So the angle of attack also affects the lift force. If we think back to that discus, the angle that discus is flying in the air will affect the launch, will affect the lift. So projectiles can be launched at specific angles, and that creates that airfoil shape to optimize the lift force. Okay, so the lower the surface of the object, it then contacts the airflow first and contributes to the pressure differential required to generate upward lift force. All that means is that the pressure underneath the object is higher than the pressure above the object, causing that lift. Okay, so air hitting the bottom of the object is forced downwards, and it is the reaction force upwards that generates the lift. If the angle of attack is too high, lift force is reduced, and drag force is increased to flight time and therefore velocity. Okay, so that could be around 26 degrees. Rotation or spin then, if we've got something rotating, a projectile rotating or spinning, this gives the object momentum, angular momentum to be more precise, which stabilizes the face it forces applied from the oncoming air. Okay, so if we've got a football and we've done a free kick, it's spinning, that stabilizes the forces acting on the object. So the stability is proportional to the mass of the object and the velocity, so how fast it is rotating. Okay, so if we've got an object rotating at optimal velocity, that will mean that it will lift in the way that we're wanting it to and towards the goal itself for that free kick. Okay, so just thinking about an example then, if we've got a ski jumper here, the downslope reduces air drag and increases velocity by body position. In the air, we maximise lift by jumping forward to glide in the air, and we assist that lift through a V formation of the skis to gain 30% more lift. So air from the base of the skis and chest generate a higher pressure and create that lift. So lift is really, really important within ski jumping. That's a nice example. So think about how this could be implemented in long jump. What is the body doing with their body position? What is the athlete doing with their body position to increase lift force during their jump? Have a think about their body position. Is there anything else that they're doing to create lift? And talk me through the different pressure changes in your distinction criteria. Okay, so just a quick summary on the upward lift force. Have a little bit of a read and make sure you fill in your table in your workbook. Okay, so if we've got upward lift, we also have downward lift. So this is used in an F1 car. Have a think about how it could be used in an F1 car. Pause your video and have a think. Okay, so if the airfoil shape is the opposite direction, just like this, upside down, we've got the curve at the bottom of the object and the flat surface at the top. This creates a downward force. Okay, so for example, in F1 or track cycling, to increase that downward force, holding the car or bike to the track, that will the objects will have those airfoil shapes to create a downward lift. Okay, so taking a look at that helmet there, there's a nice example for you. So just looking at Formula 1 in more detail, this is how a Formula 1 car is adapted to make use of this airfoil shape. So we've got the front wing funnels air down through the narrow space underneath the car's chassis, and the spoiler bar acts as an inverted airfoil, so that upside down airfoil shape, forcing that air underneath it to travel a further distance. So we've got this high pressure gradient on the top of the car and a low pressure gradient underneath the car, which creates that downward force. Okay, increasing that friction and grip onto the track, allowing our car to stay on the track as much as possible, and that is specifically important during those high speed races. Okay, so those wings on the car generate 70% of the downward force. Have a little bit of a read of the information on the screen and make sure you've added some notes to your worksheet. So just as a summary then, nice short and sweet part, that downward force. Fill in your table and make sure you understand those pressure differences now for the downward force itself. Okay, our final task of the day then, we're looking now at Magnus force and spin. I would like you to follow the Padlet. The link is also on Teams. You can choose one of the sports, so actually name starting with, and then whatever letter your name starts with, you'll be completing that particular sport. So there are 2 sports that you have been selected for you. Okay, so for example, my name is Hannah, my first name starts with a H. I'll now be looking at question 2 and 5. So I'm going to watch the video for football and baseball, and then on the Padlet, I'm going to write about how the Magnus force affects these sports. Okay, spend some time on that, make sure you put your information in the Padlet, and then move on to the next slide. Okay, so continuing with the Magnus effect then, hopefully you've learnt quite a bit through the Padlet. What do you think the Magnus effect refers to then? Have a little bit of a think about what you've just learnt. So, an idea for this is that if we're thinking about a free kick, you'll be able to see this on Teams with the link. You can see the spin of the ball and how it lifts, okay? So if the ball is spinning, that will affect the lift of the ball. So this relates to that rotating speed of an object, or a swerve, and it's the contact between air molecules at the boundary layer and the airflow. It creates that difference in pressure, causing an object to deviate from its course. So spin creates 2 different environments, one side with low velocity and high pressure, and the other with high velocity, low pressure. So including some examples like free kick, backspin in tennis or topspin, discus and shot put. And you can also think about a golf drive to create a hook or slice. Okay, so looking into this in more detail, we've got direct and eccentric forces applied to objects. So if we've got direct force, that means the force is applied through the centre of mass, and it means there's no spin on the object and pressure around the object remains constant. So the ball might be vulnerable to air variations and might fluctuate or have an unpredictable path. So that's if we're not spinning the ball. It could mean that the ball is affected by air resistance. So if we think about this here, eccentric force applied not through the centre of mass. So if we spin an object, the pressure around opposing sides of the object vary in velocity and pressure. So the pressure gradient means the Magnus effect will influence the flight path. So if we can spin the ball in a free kick, that eccentric force causes a rotation, but also increases pressure in all the areas to create that lift. And hopefully the ball will travel in the flight path that we're aiming for it to travel in. So just thinking about technology here then, if we've got a tennis ball, the fuzz on the tennis ball creates turbulent flow. Okay, so that fuzz is constantly being reconfigured due to collisions with the racket and court and its flight in the air. So this can help with spin shots and increase time in the air. So that's a little bit in regards to technology. Right, final task of the day then. I would like you to write this paragraph out in your workbooks and fill in the gaps. A little bit of homework. Have a go at making a paper plane and see if you can see some clear differences in designs. I've put the task on Teams for you to do, so that might be of something of interest to you to understand the Bernoulli's principle a little bit further. Okay, thank you very much.